When I look back now, it feels like our friendships were always bound to fall apart. At the time, though, I never could have imagined it. We were the perfect foursome, two power couples bound together by shared history, ambition, and the desire to rise above the rest. Dante, Caroline, Amelia, and I. We'd go on trips together, celebrate each other's successes, and spend weekends in the Hamptons sipping wine and laughing about the trials of life in the city. On paper, it was an ideal friendship, an enviable friendship, even. I'd known Dante since medical school, before he abandoned the idea of medicine and went into business. He had an ironclad ambition and a charm that could win over anyone in a room. He built a fortune in real estate, crushing every competitor without mercy, and by the time he married Amelia, he'd already made himself a powerful name in the industry. His ruthless streak was something I both respected and feared. He was the type of man who wouldn't hesitate to cut someone down if it meant furthering his own success. My wife, Caroline, was an opera singer, a striking woman with a voice that commanded attention. She was as driven as Dante, with a fierce ambition that could border on obsessive. Early in our marriage, her intensity had excited me. I loved her fire, her unapologetic determination to be the best. But over the years, that ambition started to consume her. Our marriage began to feel like an afterthought in her pursuit of fame. She was distant, more focused on securing connections and boosting her reputation than on spending time with our family. Every conversation turned to her career, her networking events, her plans for our daughter's future as a star musician. Somewhere along the way, she stopped being the woman I'd fallen in love with. And then there was Amelia, Dante's wife. She was everything Caroline was not: calm, poised, graceful, with a quiet strength that seemed unbreakable. She never needed to dominate a room, she held everyone's respect effortlessly, with her gentle intelligence and strong sense of fairness. Amelia had an air of dignity, of kindness, that felt so rare in our world of social climbers and ruthless ambition. She always supported Dante, standing by him with a loyalty that almost seemed naive, though she was too intelligent to be fooled by anyone. I sometimes wondered how she had ended up with someone like Dante. To me, she was perfect, someone who valued integrity and stability, things I craved more and more as my marriage began to deteriorate. Despite our personal tensions, the four of us managed to maintain an outwardly perfect friendship. We went to charity galas together, hosted extravagant dinners at each other's homes, and pretended our lives were just as ideal as they appeared. But I started to feel a rift, a growing tension I couldn't place, one that only grew worse the night of the dinner party that changed everything. The dinner was hosted by our neighbors, a wealthy couple who seemed to live for events like these. They'd spared no expense, filling their modern mansion with rare wines, decadent hors d'oeuvres, and a crowd of carefully curated guests. The house itself was a showpiece: glass walls, minimalist furniture, chandeliers that looked like they belonged in a museum. We arrived together, laughing, greeting acquaintances, and slipping effortlessly into our roles as charming, polished couples. But even from the start, something felt off. There was an odd tension in the air, a forced kind of laughter that made me wonder if I was the only one feeling it. I caught Caroline glancing around the room, her eyes scanning the crowd, always looking for someone more important to talk to. Her gaze lingered a second too long on Dante when he joined our group, his hand resting casually on her shoulder as he greeted her with his usual, confident smile. I told myself it was nothing, just a friendly gesture. But it was hard to ignore the way she leaned into him slightly, a flicker of something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. As we took our seats at the dining table, the tension grew. I was seated across from Caroline, next to Amelia, while Dante was diagonally across from his wife. The table was arranged to encourage conversation, and everyone chatted easily, laughing and making small talk over courses of caviar and rare wine. But my attention kept drifting back to Caroline and Dante. They were exchanging glances, subtle but unmistakable, and I felt a knot of discomfort forming in my stomach. At one point, Dante made a remark that caught everyone's attention. He was talking about the competitive nature of business, his tone half joking, half serious.
Sometimes,
he said, his gaze flickering over to Caroline.
You have to take risks, put it all on the line for what you want. Play things safe, and you'll never get anywhere.
Caroline raised an eyebrow, her lips curving into a sly smile.
Isn't that a dangerous philosophy, though? What happens when someone finds out what you're really after?
Dante grinned, a gleam in his eye that made my stomach twist.
Well, if they find out, maybe it just means they weren't as clever as they thought.
Their exchange seemed innocent enough, just friendly banter. But there was an edge to it, a charged undercurrent that only the two of them seemed to understand. The words hung in the air, laced with a double meaning that made my chest tighten. Amelia, who had been quiet up until then, looked between the two of them, her brow creasing slightly.
It's always risky, putting everything on the line.
She said softly.
Some things are worth protecting, even if it means being a little more careful.
For a moment, an awkward silence fell over the table. Caroline glanced down at her wine glass, and Dante let out a low chuckle, as if brushing off Amelia's comment. I felt a surge of protectiveness toward her, sensing that she, too, was picking up on something amiss. But I forced myself to laugh along with the others, determined to keep things light. The tension only intensified as the dinner went on. Caroline and Dante continued to exchange lingering glances, and their conversations grew even more pointed.
Dante, I'd love to hear more about your latest project,
Caroline said with a casual tone that barely concealed her interest.
It sounds like you're really pushing boundaries.
Dante smirked, his eyes flicking to Amelia, then back to Caroline.
Oh, I am. But not everyone is ready for the risks that come with it.
Caroline leaned forward slightly, her gaze locked on his.
Maybe some people just need a little encouragement to step out of their comfort zone.
The way she looked at him made my skin crawl. It wasn't just flirtation, it was something deeper, something that felt like a challenge. I glanced over at Amelia, but she was looking down, stirring her wine with a distracted expression, as if lost in her own thoughts. After dessert, Caroline turned to Dante with a casual smile.
Would you mind stepping outside with me, Dante? I've been meaning to pick your brain about a few ideas for a charity gala I'm organizing.
Of course.
He replied smoothly, already rising from his seat.
I'd be happy to help.
Amelia looked up, a flicker of concern crossing her face, but she didn't say anything. As Dante and Caroline slipped out onto the terrace, leaving us at the table, I felt a sense of dread settle over me. I glanced at Amelia, who met my gaze with a faint, worried smile, as if she, too, sensed that something was wrong. We sat there in strained silence, making small talk about meaningless things, each of us pretending that everything was fine. But as I glanced toward the glass doors that led to the terrace, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was beginning to crack open, that this seemingly perfect night was the beginning of something terrible. And as I looked back at Amelia, I knew I wasn't the only one who sensed it. After that dinner party, nothing felt the same. Caroline's glances, her sly smiles, the way she leaned into Dante's words, they all haunted me. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that I was just seeing things that weren't really there. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was happening right under my nose. I'd catch myself replaying moments from the night in my head, looking for signs, clues, anything to confirm or deny what I thought I saw. Caroline carried on as if nothing had changed, slipping easily into her routine of rehearsals, dinners, and late-night events. She was as distant as ever, her attention always somewhere else. But now, I felt a dark edge to her distance, a sense that her mind was preoccupied with more than just her career. She would come home late, often well past midnight, her clothes smelling faintly of unfamiliar cologne. She'd brush off my questions with quick, dismissive answers, like I was an inconvenience she had to tolerate. In an attempt to distract myself, I threw myself into work, burying my suspicions under long hours and difficult surgeries. Being a surgeon gave me a certain sense of control, a way to impose order in a life that felt increasingly chaotic. The hospital became my refuge, the demands of my job were something I could rely on, a source of purpose when everything else felt uncertain. But even in the OR, I couldn't fully escape the questions gnawing at the back of my mind. And then there was Dante. As my friendship with him began to unravel in the shadows of my suspicions, I started noticing things about him that I hadn't before. He was wealthy, yes, one of the most successful real estate developers in the city. But lately, I'd heard whispers about his business dealings, rumors about questionable investments and insider trading. He always had an edge, a ruthlessness I admired in a way, but now I wondered how far he was willing to go to stay on top. One night, I met up with a mutual friend, a lawyer who worked with some of the same high-profile clients as Dante. Over drinks, he mentioned something that sent a chill down my spine.
Dante's been taking risks lately,
He said, his tone conspiratorial.
cutting corners, making deals with people he shouldn't. He's got his fingers in everything, but it's like he's pushing too far, you know. Like he's desperate.
Desperate? I repeated, trying to sound casual.
Yeah.
The lawyer replied, glancing around to make sure no one was listening.
Apparently, he's been pulling some questionable moves. Shady offshore accounts, weird cash flows. If he's not careful, it could blow up in his face. I'd stay clear of him if I were you. He's walking a thin line.
The idea of Dante being desperate didn't fit with the image I'd had of him, the man who always seemed so in control. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If he was taking risks, making deals in the dark, maybe that same recklessness extended to his personal life as well. And if he was lying to Amelia about his business, what else was he hiding? A few nights later, while Caroline was in the shower, I noticed her phone left unattended on the bedside table. Usually, she kept it close to her, always face down, never letting it out of her sight. But tonight, she'd left it unlocked, the screen lit up with a recent text notification. I knew I shouldn't look, that it was a violation of trust. But something compelled me, maybe it was the tension I'd been holding onto for weeks, or the nagging feeling that I'd been a fool for too long. I picked up her phone, my hands shaking, and opened the message. It was from Dante.
Missing you tonight. Last time was unforgettable. Meet me at our usual place tomorrow. I'll take care of everything. Just wear that dress I like. You know the one.
My stomach twisted, the words blurring as I read them over and over. Last time was unforgettable. Our usual place. Just wear that dress I like. There was no mistaking the intimacy, the familiarity. The message was clear, shameless, as if he didn't care who saw it, like he knew Caroline would never let me see it. I felt a surge of anger, a mixture of betrayal and humiliation that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the casual way he'd written them, like this was just another routine, a normal part of their lives. They'd had a last time, they had a usual place, they had a secret world together that they'd built behind my back. I put the phone down, my hands trembling. The shower was still running, Caroline oblivious to the fact that I'd just uncovered her betrayal. I felt like I was watching my life shatter in slow motion, pieces of it breaking away with each second that passed. And in the background, I could hear her humming softly, a carefree sound that cut through me like a knife. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more. Not without making sure she couldn't twist her way out of it, couldn't gaslight me into doubting what I'd just read. She was good at manipulating people, I'd seen her do it to others countless times, and I knew she'd try to do it to me if I gave her the chance. No, I needed to be smart, to gather the pieces slowly, carefully, until there was no escape for her, for either of them. But in that moment, as I sat there in our bedroom, feeling the weight of Dante's message and all it implied, I knew one thing for certain. Our lives would never be the same again. I felt a surge of anger, a mixture of betrayal and humiliation that burned hotter than anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the casual way he'd written them, like this was just another routine, a normal part of their lives. They'd had a last time, they had a usual place, they had a secret world together that they'd built behind my back. After finding that message on Caroline's phone, any remaining trust one had for her crumbled. The words haunted me, last time was unforgettable. Our usual place. That intimacy, that shamelessness. I couldn't let it go, couldn't pretend it was anything other than what it was. but confronting her with nothing more than a single text would lead nowhere. Caroline was too skilled at twisting the truth, at playing the victim. If I wanted to truly face her and Dante, I needed undeniable proof. So, I decided to do something I never thought I'd be driven to. I started watching her. That weekend, when she told me she had another late rehearsal, I didn't stay home. Instead, I followed her. I kept my distance, trailing her cab through the dim, rain-slicked streets of Manhattan. I kept telling myself I'd misinterpreted things, that maybe I'd see her meet a friend, or even head to the opera house as she claimed. But the cab wound through the city, stopping in front of a boutique hotel, a small, upscale place known for its discretion. My stomach clenched as I parked across the street, watching her step out of the cab and look around, as if checking to make sure no one saw her. And then Dante appeared. He stepped out from the shadows near the hotel entrance, dressed impeccably, as always, his face breaking into a slow smile when he saw her. Without a word, he slipped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. She leaned into him, her head tilting up as they exchanged a few quiet words, and then they laughed, a sound that seemed both carefree and conspiratorial. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I watched Dante's hand slide possessively around her waist, guiding her inside the hotel like they belonged there together. The sight of them walking arm in arm into that building was like a knife twisting in my chest. They weren't even trying to hide it. They had this whole world together, just a few blocks away from our lives, and they were so comfortable in it that they didn't even care who might see them. The rage simmered inside me, mixing with a profound sense of humiliation, of betrayal. I had given Caroline everything, my love, my loyalty, my patience, and here she was, throwing it away for a man who treated life like a game. That night, I hardly slept. The image of them together replayed over and over in my mind, like a film reel stuck on a loop. I felt lost, angry, and horribly alone. The only person I could think of who might understand, who might even believe me, was Amelia. She deserved to know. If Dante was lying to her, living a double life, she had a right to the truth. A few days later, I called her, and we arranged to meet for coffee. She looked tired, the usual spark in her eyes dulled, and I could tell that I wasn't the only one who'd noticed the change in Dante's behavior. After a few minutes of small talk, I finally gathered the courage to tell her what I'd seen. Amelia, I began carefully, trying to find the right words. There's something you need to know. About Dante and Caroline. She looked at me, her brow furrowing, and I could see a flicker of something in her expression, fear, maybe, or a recognition of something she'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. I've noticed things between them, I continued, keeping my voice low. I saw them together. Not in a way that friends would be, not in a way that's appropriate. Amelia closed her eyes briefly, as if bracing herself, then nodded, her hand resting on her coffee cup, fingers trembling slightly.
I knew something was wrong.
She whispered.
Dante's been different. Distant, secretive. I kept telling myself it was work, stress. But I knew. Deep down, I think I always knew.
Her words hung in the air between us, and in that moment, we both understood each other's pain. We were bound by the same betrayal, both trapped in the shadows of the people we loved. But for Amelia, that suspicion was still unconfirmed, a painful idea that she hadn't yet seen with her own eyes. I could tell that she was wavering between believing me and wanting to deny it. I'm going to get proof, I said firmly, my voice steady with newfound resolve. They won't be able to hide it anymore. Not from us. She nodded, a mix of gratitude and sorrow in her gaze, and we sat in silence for a few minutes, two people whose lives had been shattered by the same betrayal. The next evening, Caroline told me she'd be out late again. This time, I didn't ask questions. I let her leave, waited a few minutes, then followed. Her cab led me downtown, and I kept my distance, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. This time, she stopped at a trendy bar known for its exclusive VIP rooms, a place where powerful people went to conduct business, or hide affairs, away from prying eyes. I slipped inside after her, moving carefully to stay out of her line of sight. I watched her make her way through the dimly lit bar, her eyes scanning the room until they found Dante. He was waiting for her at the back, leaning casually against the wall with that confident smile, the one that made me feel sick now. She walked up to him, and they exchanged a few quiet words, their heads close, sharing a secret world that no one else could enter. Dante led her to a VIP room, a secluded area draped with thick, velvet curtains that offered privacy from the rest of the bar. I couldn't get too close without being seen, but a few minutes later, a waitress entered the VIP room with drinks for them. When she exited, she left the door slightly ajar, leaving just a narrow gap, a crack in their private world. It was enough. I moved closer, keeping to the shadows of the hallway, my phone in hand, the camera ready. Through the narrow opening, I could see them inside, seated close together, leaning in like lovers. Caroline's hand rested on Dante's arm, her fingers tracing idle patterns on his sleeve. He looked at her with a smug satisfaction, like a man who'd won a prize, his other hand resting possessively on her knee. They were whispering to each other, laughing softly, and I could feel the bile rising in my throat. Every look, every touch between them spoke volumes. This wasn't a simple fling, this was intimacy, something carefully cultivated over time. They were lost in each other, so absorbed that they didn't even notice the door wasn't fully closed. They were comfortable, shameless in their betrayal. Dante's hand slid up Caroline's arm, fingers brushing her cheek in a way that was painfully tender. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, a soft smile on her lips, the kind of smile she used to reserve for me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stay steady, to keep my phone focused on them as I snapped a few photos, capturing every damning detail. Just then, Caroline leaned in, her face close to Dante's, her mouth hovering near his. I snapped another photo, catching the exact moment their lips met, the intimate embrace that shattered any last illusions I might have clung to. This was the proof, the undeniable evidence that they'd crossed a line they could never uncross. I took a step back, my heart pounding, my hands shaking as I reviewed the photos on my phone. They were exactly what I needed, clear, irrefutable. Proof of their betrayal, their lies. Part of me wanted to barge in, to confront them right then and there, to let my anger explode in front of them. But I forced myself to stay calm. This was bigger than just anger. This was about exposing the truth. As I left the bar, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The rage was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but it was tempered now, honed into something colder, something more focused. Caroline and Dante had built a world of lies, but now I held the evidence that would tear it all apart. And soon, they would face the consequences. The night I took those photos, something shifted in me. Seeing Caroline and Dante in that private room, so lost in each other, had extinguished any last remnants of hope I might have had. The betrayal was real, undeniable, and I had the proof in my hands. But the rage that had simmered beneath my calm exterior began to change. It wasn't a wild, uncontrolled anger anymore, it was cold, steady, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I didn't confront Caroline directly, not yet. I wanted her to feel it, to sense that something was different, but to wonder what, to question herself the way I had been questioning myself for weeks. So I let her keep pretending, slipping in and out of our house with the same hollow excuses and dismissive answers. But I didn't hide my suspicion anymore. I started dropping hints, little comments that seemed innocent on the surface but carried a weight that I knew she'd feel. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, I finally decided to test her. She was brushing her hair, her back turned to me, her reflection in the mirror carefully blank. "Did you have a nice evening out?" I asked casually, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read. She froze for a split second, just long enough for me to notice.
Yes, of course.
She replied, her voice light, a little too casual.
Just the usual rehearsal. You know how it is.
Rehearsal, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. It must be intense, these days. You've been out so often, and so late. She forced a smile, but her eyes were wary, watching me in the mirror.
You know how demanding the opera world is. Networking, rehearsals. It's all part of it.
I gave a small nod, then closed my book. Yes, I suppose it is. But I do wonder sometimes, if there's something else. Someone else, maybe. Caroline's face hardened, her mask slipping for just a moment. But she quickly regained her composure, letting out a soft laugh that sounded hollow to my ears.
Don't be ridiculous, James.
She said, her tone carefully controlled.
You're imagining things.
I let the silence linger, watching her through narrowed eyes. She knew I'd seen through her lies, even if I hadn't said it outright. She looked away, focusing on her reflection, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the flicker of fear in her gaze. She knew the game was up, she just didn't know how much I knew. In the following days, I redirected my attention to Dante. I'd heard enough rumors about his business dealings to know he wasn't as clean as he pretended to be, but now, I wanted specifics. If he was willing to betray his own wife, his closest friends, then there were bound to be other secrets lurking beneath the surface. I started digging, using every resource I had to unearth whatever I could about his affairs. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Dante had been funneling money through offshore accounts, hiding large sums in foreign investments that didn't hold up under scrutiny. He was involved in a series of questionable real estate deals, manipulating property values, bribing officials, and setting up shell companies to cover his tracks. On the surface, he was a legitimate businessman, a respected figure in the industry. But beneath that facade, he was playing a dangerous game, walking a line that could land him in serious trouble if it ever came to light. I gathered all the information I could, compiling records, contracts, emails, anything that connected Dante to his web of deceit. With every document I uncovered, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. He thought he could have everything, that he was untouchable. But now, I held the evidence that could unravel his empire, expose him for the fraud he was. It was a small consolation, but it gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt in weeks. Around this time, Amelia reached out to me. We'd been in touch more often lately, both of us quietly supporting each other in ways that didn't need to be spoken. She was still in the dark about the full extent of Dante and Caroline's affair, but she wasn't a fool. She had noticed the same distance in Dante, the same secrecy, and she wasn't content to ignore it. We met for coffee at a small, quiet cafe, our usual place, where the staff knew us well enough not to pry. Amelia looked tired but composed, her usual elegance untouched, her calm demeanor masking whatever turmoil she must have felt inside. She was the kind of woman who faced challenges head-on, who didn't crumble under pressure. As I sat across from her, I admired her strength, even as I hated the pain she was being forced to endure.
James.
She began, folding her hands around her coffee cup.
There's something I need to ask you. And I want you to be honest with me.
I nodded, bracing myself. Of course. Ask me anything. She took a breath, steadying herself.
Do you think Dante is hiding something from me? Not just in his business, but in other ways?
I met her gaze, searching for the right words. She deserved to know the truth, but I didn't want to hurt her more than she already was. Amelia, I said gently, I've been noticing things as well. About both of them. And I think there's more going on than either of us realized. She nodded slowly, her face tightening as she absorbed my words.
I had a feeling.
She murmured, her voice steady but laced with sadness.
He's been so distant, so secretive. And every time I ask him about it, he brushes me off. As if my concerns don't matter.
Amelia, I said, leaning forward, there are things about Dante's business that I've uncovered. Deals that aren't exactly legal. He's been taking risks, making moves that could jeopardize everything if they come to light. I have proof of it. She looked up sharply, a glint of determination in her eyes.
You have proof?
I nodded, showing her some of the documents I'd gathered. She scanned them quickly, her face impassive, though I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Amelia wasn't the type to shy away from a challenge, and I could tell that she was already thinking of how to confront Dante, of how to hold him accountable for his lies. For a moment, I hesitated. There's more to it, Amelia, I said, choosing my words carefully. I don't want to hurt you, but I think you should be prepared for the possibility that his secrets extend beyond business. She looked at me, her expression hardening as she pieced it together.
You mean Caroline?
I didn't need to answer. She saw it in my eyes, the confirmation she'd been dreading. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes briefly before opening them again, her gaze steady.
I knew, James.
She whispered.
I saw the way they looked at each other. I just didn't want to believe it.
We sat in silence for a moment, two people bound together by betrayal, by the pain inflicted on us by the people we trusted most. But instead of breaking down, Amelia straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin with a quiet strength that made me admire her even more.
So?
She said, her voice calm and controlled.
What do we do now?
I looked at her, feeling a surge of respect and solidarity. We gather everything. The affair, the business deals, all of it. And then we confront them. Together. Amelia nodded, her gaze fierce.
They won't see it coming.
For the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of hope, a sense that justice, true justice, might finally be within reach. We both knew that this confrontation would be painful, that the fallout would be messy, destructive. But we were ready. The morning I planned to confront Dante, I felt a strange, eerie calm settle over me. For weeks, I'd carried the weight of betrayal, anger, and humiliation, feeling like I was drowning in secrets. But now, I had clarity. I had evidence, and Amelia and I had a plan. Today, Dante would face the truth. Today, he would finally understand that he couldn't manipulate or deceive everyone around him without consequence. I called him that morning and asked him to meet me at a quiet cafe in a part of the city where neither of us would be recognized. I kept my tone light, casual, telling him I wanted to discuss something important. He agreed, his voice as calm and confident as ever, completely unaware of what was waiting for him. He probably thought I wanted to discuss some minor business deal or personal issue, as if our lives hadn't already been ripped apart by his actions. When he arrived, he wore his usual smug smile, the same practiced charm that he used to win over clients, colleagues, and friends. I could see how he'd built his empire, how he'd convinced so many people to trust him, to overlook his ruthless streak. But today, his charisma wouldn't save him.
James, good to see you.
He said, extending his hand as he took a seat across from me.
What's on your mind?
I didn't return his handshake. I just looked at him, letting the silence stretch long enough to make him shift uncomfortably. Then I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but firm. I know, Dante, I said quietly. I know about you and Caroline. And I know about the dirty deals, the offshore accounts, the bribes, the shell companies. I know everything. For a moment, his face went blank, the confident smile faltering. I saw the flash of panic in his eyes, though he quickly masked it, forcing a laugh that sounded painfully hollow.
James, what are you talking about?
He said, feigning innocence.
You must be mistaken.
Don't insult me, I replied, my voice cold. I have the photos. I've seen the messages. And I've spent the last month gathering everything I need to expose you, both for the affair and for every shady business deal you've been covering up. The pretense dropped. Dante's face hardened, his eyes narrowing as he realized that he couldn't lie his way out of this. The charm fell away, replaced by a cold, calculating anger. For the first time, I saw him for what he truly was, an opportunist who thought he could manipulate anyone, take anything he wanted, and discard people as soon as they were no longer useful.
What's your plan here, James?
He asked, his tone turning sharp.
You're going to destroy your own wife's reputation too, just to take me down. Do you really want that?
It's not about her anymore, I replied. It's about you. You think you're untouchable, don't you? You think you can take whatever you want, ruin lives, and get away with it. But this time, you're wrong. Dante clenched his jaw, his fists tightening on the table. I could see the rage simmering beneath his calm exterior, the frustration of a man who'd always had control and was now watching it slip away. But I didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I stayed calm, composed, knowing that every second of his discomfort was a victory. "I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are," I continued, keeping my voice steady. "The investors, the press, everyone. By the time I'm done, you won't have a company left to run." Dante stared at me, his face pale, his mouth twisting into a sneer.
"You really think you're going to come out of this clean? You think Caroline won't deny everything? She'll paint you as a jealous husband, make you look like a fool."
I felt a pang of bitterness at the mention of Caroline, but I pushed it aside. She had made her choice, and I was done trying to understand or forgive her. "Let her try," I said evenly. "I have everything I need. And so does Amelia." At the mention of his wife, Dante's mask cracked. He swallowed, his gaze faltering as he realized just how deep his lies had gone, how completely he'd destroyed the trust of the people closest to him. He opened his mouth to say something, to try to defend himself, but I cut him off. "We're done here, Dante," I said, standing up. "By the end of the day, you'll see just how much power you really have." I left him there, watching as his empire began to collapse, piece by piece. When I got home that night, I found Caroline waiting for me in the kitchen. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around as though searching for clues, sensing that something was wrong. She'd probably seen the tension in my face, noticed the way I'd started avoiding her, shutting her out. She knew I was close to the truth, and now she was panicking.
"James,"
she said, her voice soft, a tone she hadn't used in years.
"can we talk?"
I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of detachment. The love I'd once felt for her was gone, replaced by a cold emptiness. "I know everything, Caroline," I said flatly. "About you and Dante." Her face fell, the blood draining from her cheeks. She took a step back, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. But for once, she couldn't come up with an excuse, a lie to worm her way out of it. She knew it was over.
"James, I'm so sorry."
She whispered, tears filling her eyes.
"It was a mistake, I didn't mean."
"Stop," I interrupted, my voice hard. "You don't get to apologize. Not now. You made your choice. You decided he was worth more than our marriage, more than our family."
"Please."
she said, her voice breaking.
"We can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can."
"No, Caroline," I said, cutting her off. "There's no going back. I've given you everything, trusted you, loved you, and you threw it away for him. I'm done." She looked at me, her eyes wide and desperate, but I felt nothing. Whatever I'd felt for her was gone, burned away by her betrayal. I turned and walked out, leaving her alone in the dark, knowing that I was finally free. Over the next few days, the fallout was swift and merciless. Amelia and I moved quickly, using the evidence I'd gathered to expose Dante's corrupt business practices. I leaked documents to the press, sent anonymous tips to regulators, and reached out to his business associates, making sure everyone knew the truth. The story exploded in the media, prominent real estate mogul caught in web of corruption and scandal. Reporters hounded Dante, investors pulled out of his projects, and his reputation was shattered almost overnight. Amelia, ever composed and poised, stood by my side, watching with quiet satisfaction as Dante's empire crumbled. She was stronger than I realized, determined to protect her own reputation and her future even as her marriage fell apart. She handled the press inquiries with grace, painting herself as the betrayed wife who'd had no knowledge of her husband's actions. She emerged from the scandal unscathed, a beacon of dignity in the wreckage Dante had created. As for Dante, he tried to fight back, to deny the accusations, but the evidence was overwhelming. His charm and connections couldn't save him this time. In the end, he was forced to step down, his assets frozen as investigations mounted, his career in ruins. The man who'd once been untouchable, who'd believed he could take whatever he wanted, was finally brought to his knees. And Caroline? She tried to reach out a few times, leaving messages, asking me to talk things through. But I ignored them. Our marriage was over, and there was nothing left to discuss. She'd chosen her path, and now she had to walk it alone. When I look back on those days, I don't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. The betrayal still hurts, and I still feel the sting of what I lost. But there's a certain peace in knowing that justice was served, that people like Dante and Caroline couldn't simply lie, cheat, and destroy lives without consequences. In the end, we all paid a price. But for once, it felt like the right people paid the highest one. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation as Dante took the stand. He wore his usual suit, but the confidence, the arrogance that had once defined him, was gone. He looked gaunt, his eyes shadowed, his posture slumped as if the weight of his actions had finally broken him. Reporters lined the back of the room, their cameras clicking, capturing every humiliated glance, every tightening of his jaw as his empire of lies was laid bare for the world to see. The prosecution's case was airtight. Amelia and I had provided a trove of evidence, offshore accounts, fraudulent contracts, bribes, backdoor deals that painted a clear picture of a man who'd built his fortune on deception. Dante's lawyers tried to argue that he was innocent, that the deals were misunderstandings or exaggerations. But the documents didn't lie. Witness after witness came forward to testify against him, former colleagues, business partners, even a few of his closest confidants who'd been burned by his ruthless ambition. In the end, the verdict was inevitable. Dante was found guilty on multiple counts of fraud, bribery, and tax evasion. His assets were seized, his reputation shattered beyond repair. The sentence was harsh, a fitting punishment for a man who had built his life on lies. The media had a field day with it, plastering his face across headlines for weeks. Real estate tycoon exposed, the rise and fall of Dante Moretti. Once celebrated as a self-made man, he was now a cautionary tale, his name synonymous with corruption and betrayal. As for Caroline, she didn't escape unscathed either. While she wasn't involved in Dante's business crimes, the affair had become public knowledge, the scandal dragging her name through the mud alongside his. Her carefully crafted image, the glamorous, ambitious opera singer, was tarnished. Invitations to events dried up, her performances were quietly cancelled, and even her loyal fans began to turn away, scandalized by her involvement in such a lurid affair. She tried to salvage her career, but in a world as cutthroat as hers, reputation was everything. And Caroline's was now irreparably damaged. The last time I saw Caroline was in passing, a brief encounter on a crowded city street. She looked different, hollow, worn down by the fallout of her own choices. She didn't notice me, or if she did, she pretended not to. For a moment, I felt a pang of regret, of sadness for the life we'd once shared. But then I looked ahead, to the life I was building with Amelia, and I felt nothing but a strange sense of closure. Dante's name occasionally resurfaced in the news, always connected to his downfall, a ghost of his former self lingering in the city's memory. But he no longer held any power over us. He was just a memory now, a lesson in the dangers of ambition unchecked by conscience, a reminder that even the most carefully constructed empires could crumble in an instant. Amelia and I moved forward, step by step, building something real out of the ashes of our old lives. We were cautious, yes, but we were also hopeful. Together, we found a new beginning, a fresh start that neither of us had expected but both of us had needed. In the end, the betrayal, the heartbreak, it had all led us here, to a place of understanding, respect, and perhaps even love. As we stood together, watching the sunset over the city, I felt a sense of peace, a feeling that after everything, we'd finally come home. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.